Hello, I'm Nicholas Henshaw. I'm the Vicar of St Thomas's in Groombridge in East Sussex, and this is the first of a series of 4 talks through which we're going to have through Advent. I'm going to make these available on YouTube through the weeks ahead, so that there's, I hope, some help for house groups, for people sitting at home, or for anybody who wishes to reflect on the theme of Advent and the season, what it says to us, how it leads to Christmas, and all the different themes that emerge over the 4 weeks of this season. So first of all, what on earth is Advent? Well, Advent, the word, is quite helpful. It just means coming, or arrival, if you like. And indeed, it goes back to those early years when Christians were still establishing the shape of the year. We're very used to this idea that the Christian year has 2 great feasts, or 4 great feasts, or however many great feasts in your particular tradition, but Christmas and Easter, as if you like, the cornerstones of that, with Pentecost centre stage in the middle of the year. Of course, the early Christians didn't really do it like that. It developed considerably over time. So Easter was always, the great feast where everything important happened. And indeed, and I won't go into this, I promise, because I could go on forever, the dating of Christmas depends on the dating of Easter, not the other way round. So we have death, new life, and we have birth. The season of Christmas, the feast of Christmas, as we now have it, is a relatively modern creation. Indeed, the early Christians didn't celebrate Christmas at all. There is no evidence of Christmas as a Christian feast until at least 400 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And indeed, in a form that's recognisable as a major feast, that comes 900 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So Christmas as an important festival for Christians really only emerges towards the end of the first millennium, the first 1,000 years of Christianity. It's just worth taking note of that. Easter is there from the beginning. The death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and indeed the ascension, absolutely fundamental. And of course, it's not that Christmas is incidental. It's really important. There was a birth. We have evidence and no doubt, and all the extraordinary celebrations and thoughts that we have around the birth of God as one of us at Bethlehem. They're really profound for us, but that only developed over time. And indeed, bizarrely, the season of Advent seems to have been created originally not to look forward to Christmas, but to look forward to Epiphany. And in many ways, Epiphany, and still today in many cultures, is seen as more important than Christmas. So if you're in Greece at Christmas, not much is going to happen on the 25th of December. Everything is going to happen, in most cultures, on the 6th of January, the feast of the Epiphany. I won't go down that rabbit hole now either, but we could do that later, perhaps when we get into the new year. So this season of Advent develops over time. And in many ways, it was copied a little bit in terms of its feel from Lent, although it's completely different in theology and understanding. Lent are those 5-6 weeks running up to Easter, characterised by fasting and prayer. And as the early Christians began to get into the idea of Christmas and Epiphany, then they said, we need something similar, a kind of penitential season. Except it's not really penitential. I think that's one of the important things. The themes of Lent may be penitence and prayer, but the themes of Advent are joy and expectation. And whatever else I say in this video, I want you to hold on to that. It's joy and expectation as the fundamental things that drive the season of Advent as we look forward to the coming of the Lord. And so joy and expectation, absolutely. And the way in which these origins speak to us today of setting aside time in a unique way. Christians didn't try to colonise time, but through these great feasts, Christmas, Pentecost, Easter, and so forth, sought to invite people of faith to enter more and more deeply into the mystery of the gospel, and indeed the shape of Jesus' life. In the end, the seasons of the Christian year don't matter at all unless they do that, unless through reading, reflection, and the themes of the feast themselves, they draw us more deeply into the person of Christ, the teaching of Christ, and enable us to follow him more closely day by day. So Advent is a kind of disciplined series of 4 weeks with different themes each week that lead us towards the Christmas miracle. So that's kind of introduction in general to Advent, and I hope that's a bit helpful, but I'm very happy if you want to email me questions and say what on earth that's about, and I could deal with those in our next session next week. So what about this first Sunday of Advent? This first Sunday of Advent? Well, let's recognise that each Sunday of Advent, 1, 2, 3, 4, has traditionally its own distinct themes. And on the first Sunday of Advent, traditionally we focus on the Patriarchs. I'll say a bit more of those in a minute. On the second Sunday, on the prophets, again, a bit more in a minute and next week. On the third Sunday, John the Baptist. And on the fourth Sunday, Mary, the mother of Jesus. So you can see the sequence. It's all about looking forward, this great sense of hope, expectation, new life, God coming among us, and extraordinary blessings that then explode in the wonderful sense of the gift of God himself in the Christmas miracle. So what about this first week of Advent? The theme, the Patriarchs. Sounds rather grand, doesn't it? What's a patriarch? Well, we sometimes use it in English, don't we, to mean a rather venerable head of a family in rather 19th century sort of way. That's not what we're talking about, shall we say? But we are talking about venerable people from a long time ago. The classic patriarchs are, of course, the figures in Genesis, the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible. In Hebrew, the book of Genesis is just called "in the beginning" because in Hebrew it's always the first words of the text that name the book. I love that, in the beginning, that sense that something extraordinary is going on. And of course, there are the creation narratives, and then we get to what? Well, we get to Abraham. And in many ways, many scholars would suggest that Abraham is the first genuinely historical figure that we find in the Old Testament. And what an extraordinary figure he is. He emerges from out of Ur of the Chaldees, somewhere far, far in the Middle East, as this figure emerging in response to the call of God, setting out on a journey. He doesn't know where he's going to go. He doesn't know what direction he's going to be led. But again and again, he sees the promises of God fulfilled and responds faithfully to that call. And Abraham is, if you like, the beginning. And if you want a date for Abraham, of course, dates in the ancient world are pretty random. It's very difficult to pin down. The traditional date for Abraham is around 1900 BC, so 4,000 years ago. I think that's 4,000 years ago. So way back, I mean, unimaginably long ago for us. So Abraham emerges out of into the narrative as this extraordinary follower of God. His eyes opened and ready for a future which is open, a future he cannot predict. And in fact, it leads in all sorts of directions. But Abraham, of course, is not the only patriarch. But Abraham, we've got Isaac, and we've got Jacob. Jacob is also called Israel. Come to them in a minute. But also, let's not forget, it's not just the men. Because a crucial thing about the Abraham story, and indeed the other patriarchs, is we're talking about the foundational stories of Judaism and therefore Christianity in this extraordinary covenant with God. Let's say a word about covenant. Covenant is not like a contract. A contract's an agreement, I'll do this if you do that. The covenant that God makes with Abraham originally, and then with the whole people, is that I will love you and never let you down. And okay, you're going to mess it up, but I'll call you back to me. And there's nothing you can do for me to stop loving you. I will go on loving you through thick and thin, and there'll be a lot of nonsense along the way because I know you're going to be wayward. I know it's going to go all sorts of places that you shouldn't be going. And yet I will never, ever let you down, and I will never, ever let you go. And of course, those strands, for a Christian, go right into the foundations of Christianity and a profound sense that we are part of that same covenant. We are in a relationship with God that will never fail. What are the limits to God's love? There are no limits to God's love. And okay, we may wander away. Things may go wrong. And yet God is faithful and invites us, of course, to be faithful in response. And Abraham is the heart, the beginning of that. He has visions of God. God speaks to him with this covenant. It's all about promise. All about promise. A theme, of course, picked up in the letters of Paul later on. And so here we are on this first Sunday of Advent, where this sense of these people from so long ago, and yet foundational to our own experience of God today, because we are still the people of the covenant, those to whom God has made promises. And of course, in Christianity, that becomes a promise to everybody, without boundaries in terms of faith and context and culture. So Abraham and his wife Sarah, because the women are very important in this, because of course this is all about succession. And so without the female patriarchesses, so to speak, then nothing much is going to happen. So you've got Abraham and Sarah, and Sarah is promised that she will have a child very late in age. Very beautiful scene around the Oaks of Mamre when three unusual visitors appear and promise her that she's going to have a child. And she laughs, and then she has a child in late age. And that child is Isaac, right? Abraham, Isaac, the second patriarch. And the word Isaac just means he laughs. Why? Well, because that's what his mother did when the three visitors said, you're going to have a baby, even though you're very old. And she laughs, and so she calls her son. He laughs. I think it's rather beautiful. So Abraham, Isaac, the next generation, if you like, the next generation. And so we've got Abraham and his wife Sarah. We've got Isaac and his wife Rebecca. And the meeting between Isaac and Rebecca, I think, is one of the most beautiful passages in the whole of the Old Testament. It's utterly beautiful as Abraham sees her coming from a long distance, and she comes down off the camel and they meet. And it's really, really beautiful. And then Abraham with Sarah, Isaac with Rebecca, and then, poof! I can't resist recognising my own biases here. Along comes Jacob, a truly extraordinary figure. A truly extraordinary figure. I mean, they're all pretty extraordinary. Isaac, and he has two wives, and Rachel and Leah, for all sorts of complex reasons. And you've probably heard me witter on about Jacob, but it is extraordinary. Jacob is a bit of a rogue. And from the very beginning, he transplants his twin brother and nicks his birthright. And then when he goes to work for somebody else, he nicks all his sheep, and on it goes. So Jacob's, in those early chapters of Genesis, feels quite like a rogue, to be honest. And then in one of the most extraordinary passages again in the Bible, Genesis chapter 32, Jacob is on his way to meet his brother. The brother he has robbed, the brother he has cheated since the very beginning, and he's scared. Gosh, he's scared. And he sends presents ahead to his brother Esau, to kind of make him feel better. He sends his wives and children into safety because he's really scared. And then in the darkness of his fear, in the darkness of the night, he wrestles with God. I mean, it's visceral, absolutely visceral. And at the end of the night, God essentially knees him in the groin and dislocates his hip. And it's an extraordinary line at the end where it says, as the day was breaking, Jacob went on his way limping because of his hip. There we have a whole theology of vulnerability, that Jacob is able to go on with his journey to meet his brother, worried about what reception he's going to get. But the sign that he is reconciled, and can be reconciled both with God and with his brother, is that he is wounded, that he is vulnerable. I'll leave that there for now. But so these great patriarchs are extraordinary people. And at the end of the fight with Jacob, what does God say to him? He said, you have striven with God. In Hebrew that is Israel. I'm going to call you Israel because you have striven with God. And so throughout the Old Testament, and particularly in the Psalms, you'll find the word Jacob and Israel used to mean exactly the same thing, or rather both a person and the people. And that's very common in ancient literature, that a person can represent the whole people. So Jacob is both the name of a particular patriarch and is the name of the people of Israel. And again that recurs throughout the Old Testament and beyond. So those are the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. And as I was saying, this is from 1900 BC, somewhere around there. These are very ancient peoples, and they are the people of the covenant. They are the people whom God has made promises to. We are their successors in so many different ways. And our invitation in Advent is that we fulfill ourselves, our side of the covenant. The God who has loved us with an everlasting love, the God who will never fail us, the God who will lead us into glory, the God who we shall then see visible in the person of Jesus Christ, teaching, healing, and then dying and rising again. is a God in whom we can trust, a God who will always remain faithful and invites us to do the same, invites us to go on the same journey as our predecessors in the faith, those on whose shoulders, as on the shoulders of giants, we live out our faith ourselves. And so those are things I invite you to reflect on in this first week of Advent. These ancient roots and a God from beyond all time, the God who created the universe, as the God who still speaks to us, and invites us to speak with him as we might speak with a friend. That's a quote from Genesis as well. That deep sense that we are utterly loved, utterly accepted, and that God will never extort any response from us, but he will invite us to respond in the joy, simplicity and mercy of the good news of Jesus Christ, to the gift that we have received. Sometimes a gift we don't even know we've received, and yet that is God's purpose. And in Advent, we are preparing once again to go through that journey towards the gift of Jesus Christ at Christmas. These 4 weeks of hope and expectation. We're not pretending to go back 1,000, 2,000 years and redo the drama. In a sense, we do that with our nativity praise and so forth, but actually to focus on this extraordinary gift that God became a human being so that we might become gods, to quote the New Testament. Or from one of the early church fathers, God became one with us, that we might become one with him. That is the promise. That's the nature of the faith we share. And that is the promise Abraham, Isaac and Jacob hold out to us today.